surveillance? I mean, should Australians be prepared for having their faces scanned to use social media?
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I've got a, let me just fix that. It's a very special guest today, and we've got some technical issues as well. I'm not sure what's going on here. A man who needs no introduction, the leader of Australia's freedom movement, Craig Kelly.
Thanks, Leon.
How are you, Craig?
Now, great to be with you. And I must admit, I was looking through the sort of forerunner you have to introduce your program, and it's really hard to believe that there were scenes that happened in my Australia. That's something you would more expect to see in some third world dystopian country or dystopian future. But that's on the public record. That's what happened here in Australia, and that's why so many of us are in there fighting to make sure that we return Australia to the great country that once was.
Absolutely. And speaking related to this, we've got an election right around the corner, and it's an election really. We're hanging on a thread. It's either going to be a Liberal government or a minority Labor government with the Greens, and that would be, in my opinion, an existential threat to this country. What are your thoughts on that?
If we look at the polls, the Liberals have a huge job of winning this election outright. To have an outright majority in the lower house. They've got to win something like 18, 19 seats. And it's very difficult. That would be an historic win. It's very difficult to see how they could actually win that many seats, especially when there's so much advantage of incumbency for sitting members of Parliament. Sitting members of Parliament today get so many resources, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably up to $500,000 worth of extra resources provided through the government system that they get to help retain their seats. So it's very hard to see the Liberals winning that number of seats. So the possibilities that we are left with, and these are not very attractive possibilities, is one is that Albanese combines with the Greens and several of the Teals to form a new government. Now, an Albanese, Greens, Teals government would be worse than the current Albanese government, which has been the worst in Australia's history. So that's not very much to look forward to. Now, on the other hand, the grave fear is that you would have a Liberal government that would be dependent and reliant and held hostage by these Teals with their climate alarmism, that would hold the Liberals to hostage and say, unless you do this, we won't let you form government. We'll go to an election campaign. So the other risk of is this Liberal government weak wet, and woke going down the track that will be very little difference from Albanese. And we saw the Teals all voted for that misinformation bill. The Teals are the enemies of free speech. The Teals are the enemies of baseload, reliable, low-cost power in this country. Those are those important issues that we really need the Liberal Party to stand up on if they form government. Unlikely they're likely to be held hostage by the Teals, or some of the Liberal Party would be happy to be held hostage by the Teals. So it's a bit of a bleak outlook at the moment, but the one bright light on the horizon, if we could get enough people from these minor independent freedom parties, and yes, I'll put my hand up, vested interest here. I'm a member of the Libertarian Party. I'm number one Libertarian Party ticket in New South Wales, which is now doing a joint ticket. If we could get a few more people elected into that parliament, that will put a bit of steel into the spine of the Liberal Party if they're able to form government. If it's a Labor Teals government, we'll be able to hold them to account every single day. That is perhaps the one bright spot we've got in this next election cycle coming up.
How would you describe the Libertarians? Do they have any conservative? Do they have a conservative element to it? I know that it's a broad church, but do they accommodate conservatives?
Yeah. Look, this was formerly the Liberal Democrat Party, which was basically a lot of disaffected, I'd say, conservatives and libertarians that were very disgruntled about how the Liberal Party had given up its traditional values and moved sort of to the right of the, they really didn't think that one nation was the answer, with the way the party operates under Pauline. And I don't want to criticise her. She's done a very good job for many years. But they thought that a Liberal Democrat Party that is effectively a libertarian with a conservative streak to it, party to the right of the Liberal Party was the way to go. The Labor government, the Liberal government, got together and changed the rules. So that knocked out the old Democratic Labor Party down there in Victoria that had some strength to it, that had been around for many years. They were banned from using that name. And the Liberal Democrats were banned from using that name. So they reformed themselves, or they must say reformed, so they simply changed their name or took up the name of the Libertarians. And the Libertarian cause is what we see. The best example of it is Milei over in Argentina. And we see how those libertarian economic policies have turned what was a socialist basket case for close to near a century with collectivist socialist policies that Argentina used to be the century ago, it was the richest country up there, the richest country in the world. And now it's basically almost like a third world country, a very poor country because of all these socialist policies that have destroyed the nation slowly and eroded after year. Millei's been able to have a remarkable turnaround in little over 12 months with libertarian policy. So we've shown economically these policies work. A lot of the other policies we're seeing, even though President Trump doesn't call himself a libertarian, and some things he does aren't libertarian, but many of President Trump's policies are libertarian. We see a libertarian streak through Nigel Farage's party, Reform, in the UK. So the Libertarian Party and libertarian ideals and values across the world are going from strength to strength as the pendulum swings back from this collectivist, left-wing, socialist agenda that has overtaken so many nations and has done so much damage around the world.
So my next question is in two parts. First part is, what do you think people, the little guy on the street, the average person on the street, and people watching this are certainly not average people, they're all amazing freedom fighters, but what can they do to turn the situation around? Because certainly a minority Labor, Teals, Green coalition is not an option for this country. They will do irreversible damage. My next question is a school of thought. I believe it's led by the likes of Ricardo Bossi, who believe that we should all sit this one out. The system's rigged. There's nothing that we can do. So, so the first question is, what can the little guy do? Two, is it rigged? Should we just throw our hands up in the air?
I'll take the second part first. The idea that you shouldn't vote. Now, this is pure madness. Right? If you are telling people that would most likely otherwise vote against the government of the day and would support any of the minor freedom parties, or even potentially be inclined to vote for the Liberals, right? But mainly the people that are getting this message are people that would support the Freedom Parties, not to vote at all. The only people that helps is the Labor Party and the Greens, because it takes them out. You know, this idea that not voting is somehow, a clever idea. This is insanity. Like, there's been seats that have been won and lost. I remember several years ago, he's passed now. Ewan Jones, a great man. He was the member up there for the seat of Dawson up in Townsville. He lost his seat in the House of Representatives by, I think it was something like 11 or 20 votes. So if all those people that sat on the sideline had have gone out and voted on that day, he would have got elected. Right? A couple of votes can swing them. Remember, we saw in 2010 when Julia Gillard formed a government after the election. The only reason she did was because of the preferences. It was a tied parliament, hung parliament. There were three independents or not aligned. There was Bob Katter, Oakeshott and Windsor. Bob Katter said he'd support the coalition. Oakeshott and Windsor said they would support, or Windsor said he would support the government. So it came down to Oakeshott, what he would do as to who would be the Prime Minister. So the idea that somehow your vote doesn't count or you can't make a difference is a nonsense. Again, look at the mis and disinformation bill. That bill was on a knife edge about getting through, right? If we had had one or two more senators in that parliament, we could have knocked it off easily. But it was the average citizen getting out, getting on their email, picking up the phones, ringing up those senators and saying, hey, we don't want you to vote for this. That changed the tide. So this idea that the individual citizen, can't affect the results or can't help is a complete and utter nonsense. That's firstly. And secondly, not to vote, it helps Albanese and Greens. So if you think if you don't want to vote at this election, if you think you might support whether it's the Libertarians or whether it's Clive Palmer's new party or whether it's One Nation or whether it's a small independent sitting somewhere in your local electorate, if you think that not voting for them and sitting on the sideline, the only person that you're helping is Anthony Albanese and the Greens and out of band. So this policy, I said, is complete and utter madness. It is completely counterproductive. And I really don't know what the agenda is of people that are pushing this policy, because it's not, as I said, the only winner is Albanese and the Greens. Now, what can people do to help? Well, firstly, I'd encourage everyone to set up as many social media accounts as you can. Make sure you're on all the platforms. Not just X, Telegram, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, whatever they are. And if you haven't got those accounts, get the youngest person in your household to try and help you to set them up, right? And share the messages. Click like when you see those messages, right? Because what that does, the way the algorithms work, is that when someone puts a post up, so say I put a post up saying, for example, Australia needs to abandon net zero, right? Now, at the moment, we've got in the mainstream media, you've got Labor and Liberal both wanting to go for a net zero policy. And that's how the mainstream media cover it. It's very hard for us to get coverage saying, no, there is a party out there that wants to get out and abandon this net zero nonsense, right? Everyone that puts a like or a share or writes a comment, with the algorithms, all these social media platforms, that helps spread the message. So just by putting a like or a share, or even you can just like a comment with a smiley face or something, or a tick, right? That puts that message on more people's timelines. So the more that we can spread the message on social media, so I'd encourage everyone to make sure that you've got social media accounts, plural. And if you see a message or a comment, political comment that you agree with, share it, like it, comment on it, because that spreads the message. Secondly, get out there and help on election day. We've shown that where we have people on a polling booth for a minor party, our vote goes up 200%, 300%, 400%. So having someone, just to volunteer, even if it's for an hour, to volunteer on a polling booth on election day, to stand there and hand out some how to votes against the government and for the minor parties, that is also a great help. And whether I would love you to do it for the Libertarian Party, but if not, do it for one of the other minor freedom parties, Jared Rennick's People First, Pauline or Clive. We need as many people out there on polling day as we can to counteract the Labor Party, who are often all paid agitators who have a vested financial interest in ensuring the Labor Party gets re-elected to keep the gravy train of government subsidy support flowing, or the Liberal Party. So that's the second thing I said. Get out there and help on election day as well.
And if someone brought this up, Tash, I'm not sure if I've read your comment right, but I think the justification, I mean, who knows what the motivation is? I think the motivation is probably sinister, but I heard that if not enough people vote, they can't form government. So that's the justification for pushing that.
Well, that's firstly, it's 100% incorrect. Okay. Now, whoever pushing that, right? That sounds like a line someone from a Labor Party bot or something would drop that line, hoping people don't vote against the government, right? When the AEC go to count the ballot papers, right? The first they basically open the ballot boxes up on the night. They tip the ballot papers all on the table. Okay. And what they do, they then start putting them in piles. Now, if you haven't voted or you've put a line through it, your vote just simply gets thrown in the bin. It doesn't count. And then they'll allocate and then they'll count the votes, and whichever party gets the most of the formal votes wins the election campaign. So by not voting, right, is basically giving a message that you are apathetic and you don't care who governs you. And at the end of the day, it makes no difference whatsoever. Look, you're going to send a message of, I might get into trouble for saying this, Lynn, but you can actually draw pictures on the ballot paper and you'll have your vote still counted as being formal, right? As long as you don't identify who you are as the voter, right? If you clearly write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right, and you do a little artistic work on the side of the ballot paper, your vote counts. So if you want to do something like that, go ahead and do it because your vote counts. But the idea not to vote or to vote informal is really, I says, the winner of this is Albanese. You're throwing away your vote. You're throwing away your chance to have a vote. And I think it's about something like 10% of the people don't vote anyway. And to give up, if you do give up your right to have a say, well, for the next 3 years, shut up. If you had your chance to have a say, so don't bother about complaining what's going on or the bad government that you get.
Interesting comment from Mark Russell. Are we the carbon that needs to be removed for net zero? So what's on the menu? What's for dinner tonight? We happen to be on the menu.
That's a very good point, because a lot of people think this net zero only applies to our our electricity generation sector. Right? Now, no, net zero is the total CO2, and they also count methane emissions in there. Right? So to get to net zero, it's not just you have to close down all your coal-fired power stations and all your gas coal-fired power stations. You've got to take every petrol car off the road. You've got to get rid of every diesel generator around the place. Okay, you're going to close down your coal mining and your gas mining, because that, as you do that leaks methane. You've also got to do a mass culling of the herds of dairy cows and beef cattle and sheep around the nation. It's something like 14% of our overall what they count as emissions under this net zero come from the agricultural sector. When I say come from agriculture, that's not the farmer with a diesel generator in the shed. That's the burps and the farts coming from the cows, the sheep, and the pigs and the goats. And that has to get back to net zero. Now, it is one of the most crazy policies whatsoever. Now, we're inflicting ourselves upon this, right? But the USA and China are saying no. So most of the world, and India are doing no. So we're inflicting a policy on ourselves to put our nation at a competitive disadvantage, to cost ourselves trillions of dollars. And at the end of the day, we're handing an advantage to communist China. Like China, just some number. We've got 21 gigawatts of coal-fired power stations left in this country, which we plan to close down over the next 20 years. Right? 21 gigawatts. China today have 421 gigawatts under construction. So they've got 20 times the existing size of our coal power fleet under construction to add to the 1,000 gigawatts they've already got. And we think closing down our 21 coal-fired power stations is going to make some difference. There's a chart, calculations that Bjorn Longborg did the other day. And he looked at, okay, let's say you really believe that you control the global temperature. There's CO2 is this special control knob, and if you control the level of CO2, you control the average global temperatures, and the average global temperatures control bad weather. So, okay, but let's just say this control knob on CO2 controls average global temperatures. Well, if the entire European Union went net zero by 2050 and sustained that net zero to 2100, the saving, the amount of warming that would be avoided is 0.08 of 1 degree centigrade. So that's 8/100ths of 1 degree that will be avoided in 75 years' time. Now, Australia's contribution, I love these politicians say, oh, pardon me, we've got policies to, we're taking real action against climate change. I'm voting for real action here in Australia. Okay, if you run those numbers through, if Australia went net zero by 2050 and we sustained it to the year 2100, right, the warming that would be avoided, and again, if that CO2 works as a control meter, it's 0.001. Right? Sorry. Okay. You get mixed up. 0.01. So it is 1/100th of 1 degree Celsius that we are going to avoid warming in 75 years' time. You can't even measure that. We don't have the equipment to measure centigrade to 1/100th of a degree. But that is what this net zero is all about in Australia. It is truly, and yet we have the Labor and Liberal Party have signed up to these policies.
Interesting. And also some interesting comments here. Just have Google Topher Fields, the marble video. A lot of people.
Yeah, excellent video. If you haven't seen it, watch it. I'm working on something on a similar line, so I'm going to do a case study of the seat of Fowler here in Sydney, how that was won with preferences and how the preference system works. Because one of the things I find most people don't have a really good understanding of is how our preference system actually works. Many people think that the preferences are all allocated by the major parties. So you vote who you want for, and the parties just give their preferences away or do backroom deals. Remember, I know it's different in the Victorian upper house elections, but in the federal Senate elections and the lower house, the only person that gives the preference is the person that marks the ballot paper on your hand, right? Parties only make recommendations, and it's up to you as the voter whether you want to follow it or not. Let me give you an example. In my old electorate of Hughes, now to the Greens, I was the devil. Right? The Greens used to hate my guts. Right? I was the Greens' public enemy number one. But I still received 15% or between 10 and 15% of Green preferences. So people that would vote one for the Greens wouldn't necessarily follow the Greens how to vote card, and they would preference me ahead of the Labor Party. So the parties, I say, it's recommendations only, and every voter gets up to make up their own mind.
Craig, going back to net zero, I can't help but think this is a deliberate act of sabotage. It's got nothing to do with the environment at all. These aren't naive fools, useful idiots. They really are sinister people who are pushing this. What are your thoughts on that?
There's a couple of aspects to this. Firstly, like the COVID caper, there's billions of dollars to be made in this net zero, right? If you're one of the insiders and you know how the system works with renewables and trading carbon certificates and all this other non-productive nonsense, right? There's billions of dollars to be made. And that's why we see so many of these people on the renewables bandwagon, because they know it's a great way to make money. It's a great way to profit, jacking up the costs of living for Australians, forcing Australians to pay more for their electricity. It's a great money-making scheme. So there's always the follow the money side of it, right? Secondly, you've got the people I'd call the control freaks. The people that like to control every aspect of the way we run our lives. Now, this is why, pardon me, the net zero is the greatest thing they've got. Because remember, if you say that carbon is pollution, right, everything you do emits carbon. As your gentleman said before, breathing emits carbon, right? Everything you eat, the cattle, the sheep thing, that emit carbon. So it lets them control what you eat. That's why you must eat the bugs. That's where it comes from. It lets them control what type of transport that you can have, what type of car or something. If you have a car or you go on the public electric bus, it lets them control the type of energy that you use. It lets them control your travel and restrict your travel. They think, well, hang on, these jet aeroplanes need to burn jet fuel when they fly, so we've got to tax that. So only the most wealthy people can afford to fly, so we'll put all these carbon taxes on flying, so they can control every aspect of your life. So if you're a socialist, collectively minded person that thinks you want to control how everyone should run their lives, like we see so many of the United Nations and the World Health Organization and the World Economic Forum that want to control the world, this net zero is a great thing because it gives you the excuse to introduce policies where you get to control how other people live their lives.
Absolutely diabolical. And let me ask...
Let's just try that. These people have very little care for the harm that they are doing. The data is very clear on this. Many more people die, something like around the world, 9 times more people die from cold weather than hot weather. Right? So when you make it unaffordable for people to heat their homes in winter, you are causing illness and death to people. What are we doing with our at the moment, we're surrendering our economic advantage with net zero, not economic, but military advantage to the communist Chinese. Everything we do under net zero strengthens communist China. Remember, we subsidize buying solar panels from China. Who benefits from that? Communist China. We subsidize buying all the wind turbine parts from China. Who benefits from that? Again, Communist China. Electric cars. Who dominates the market in electric cars and all the minerals for batteries? Communist China. Who benefits when electricity price becomes very high for industry here and they have to move offshore? Who benefits? Communist China. So everything we are doing under this net zero policy, which the Labor and Liberal Party are both pushing, strengthens communist China, who at the moment have a flotilla of naval vessels sailing around our coast, trying to show us who's boss. You know, if we lost, just think, we've got that coal seam that runs down our eastern seaboard, one of our nation's greatest natural advantages. Now, if we fought a war and we lost the war, the enemy would say, well, you're not going to use that beautiful black coal seam. We're going to dig it up and we're going to export it back to our country because we won the war and we're going to use it to give it to our people. Right? That's the policy of the Labor and Liberal Party. They're saying Australians can't use that black coal seam that runs down our eastern seaboard, but it's okay to ship it off to communist China. How is this policy not bordering on treachery? I said, if we lost the war, that's a policy that would be enforced upon us. And yet that is the policy at this next election of the Labor and Liberal Party. So if you want to see our wealth transferred off to communist China, if you want to see Australians being banned from using our own resources and shipped off to China, just continue to vote Labor and Liberal, Greens or Teals.
I mean, there's no other way. I wouldn't even say it's bordering on treachery. It is treachery. It is treason. You've got a question there. How is politics a solution without the Constitution? What's the mechanism to get Australia back? I think you may have answered part of that question.
Yeah, look, what we've got to do, firstly, we've got to get enough politicians elected into Canberra that will take on the status quo. Now, that starts with the Senate, right? If we could get, at the moment, the problem we've got with I say freedom-minded parties or people that are freedom-minded is that we are freedom-minded and we don't follow collectivist ideals. So we're on the Labor Party. You've got the Labor Party completely collectivist. Anyone that steps out of line, it's execution at dawn for them. So they're all kept on track of being. They're really the people that go to Canberra in the Labor Party are nothing more than useful idiots or just noddies. They just nod there. You know, you can't vote against any Labor Party policy. Anyone that speaks up against anything is disbarred. So I don't even know why they even bothered to turn up, those Labor Party members, right? Then you've got the Greens, again, a collectivist party that they concentrate all these hodgepodge of far left-wing ideas under the Greens banner. You know, the Greens are more socialist and communist than they are extreme environmentalist today. Right?
That's
but on
true.
the other side, on the other side, to the right of the Liberal Party, because we're all freedom-minded, we've got all these different parties all fighting and sort of cannibalising the vote. And the way our voting system works, especially in the Senate, the preferences don't flow. So this is one of the ideas where we've got to sort of come together as freedom coalitions in that Senate to try and get enough senators elected. There's no reason, we should have on the votes of the past couple of elections in Parliament today. There should be 12 senators. Well, I'd say freedom-minded. Actually, should be 13. This Jared Rennick came across from the Liberal Party, so we should have 6. We should have won 6 at the last 2 elections, and have 6 people there plus Jared Rennick, a team of 13, which would have the balance of power. Are all like-minded people, like imagine if you had 13 Malcolm Roberts, Jared Rennicks, and Ralph Babbitt's in Parliament. You had 13, they had the balance of power. Imagine what they could do and how they could fight against a lot of rotten legislation and get things done in this country. We've got to do it through the parliamentary system, and that's why it's important that people get out there not only and vote, but advocate for people to vote and get out there and help the minor parties.
We've got a question from Chris. She's been waiting so patiently. This relates to chemtrails. Craig, what are your thoughts on chemtrails? Are they myth or fact?
Look, I remember as back in the 80s, seeing some of the chemtrails in the skies over Sydney. I thought, well, that's unusual. I haven't sort of seen that. And then I was over in America in one American wintertime. I think I might have been down in Atlanta, or I might have been in Denver. It might have been Atlanta. And you could see all the planes flying overhead. And you see, look at all the trails coming from those planes. Now, there's definitely today more trails coming out of planes than I've seen that I can ever remember in my lifetime. So someone's been looking at this and keeping an eye on this since the 1980s and observing it here in Australia. What effect they have on the climate, what they do to blocking out the sun's rays, I think that is something that needs a little bit more investigation on. I'm probably not as suspicious on this as other people, but I certainly understand people's concerns. I certainly understand people's concerns when you look up at the sky and you see these trails coming out of the back of planes, and I think they're more than they have ever been, that there should be some assurance for the public, or some investigation to assure the public that they are safe.
If I'm not mistaken, I could be corrected on this, I believe Donald Trump may have recently mentioned or referenced chemtrails. Another question here.
You mentioned something. They're spraying us. The one thing I've always, I must admit, I'm skeptical about everything. Look, with I always say, follow the money. Now, with the COVID stuff, there's a clear follow the money trail. People that were profiting by, telling us lies. People that were profiting by forcing people to get the vaccines. People that are profiting by the lockdowns. We see with net zero, there's people profiting from the renewable industry, but I'm yet to work out where people profit from spraying us from the skies, because as an individual, you can tell your family not to get the vaccine and everyone else gets vaccinated, but it's very hard to tell your family to avoid breathing the air outside.
Exactly.
So everyone's got to breathe everyone's got to breathe the air outside. So look, as I said, I remain skeptical, but that's just my nature. But I'm sure more than enough that I think there needs to be looking at it to see if the condensation trails, the vapor trails coming out of planes, if the volume of those, what effect that has on the weather, if any. I think that's a legitimate question, which there should be some scientific research and study into, and let's have a look at the issue. Because I know a lot of people are very concerned about it, and many people, do bring those concerns to me.
I've got my next question is something that I'm curious to ask you. Trumpets of Patriots. So Clive Palmer recently launched this party. I actually think Clive is a brilliant man. He's got wonderful ideas. I really wish, to be honest with you, that he would be, prime minister, or in a situation where he would be in a position of influence to lead a government, have his people running the country. He's a really, rational person, in my opinion. But I'm not sure if he's serious about winning. I mean, he set up Trumpets of Patriots. He didn't have enough time to, register the UAP, and he says that he wants to win government and have, the leader of the party, Sue Ellen, be prime minister. that, in my opinion, is obviously not realistic. I think if he were realistic and pragmatic, he would have to work within the system, kind of like Donald Trump. Donald Trump took over a mainstream party, the Republican Party. He didn't form his own party. He did try that in the past. He didn't get far, but then he eventually took over the Republican Party. And I think if Clive was really serious about that, he would have done the same thing with the Liberal Party. He's got the tools, the resources, and the know-how to do that. What are your thoughts?
Well, look, the disclosure, both you and I are former United Australia Party candidates. Clive did deregister the party after the last election, which was disappointing. I would have hoped that we could have, kept the party going and developed a branch network and liaised with the other minor parties and kept having meetings and forums and functions throughout the last 3 years. But Clive decided upon himself to deregister the party, and that made it under the electoral laws that once you deregister, you can't run that party at the next election. And because then he took the court case, which he lost. A lot of legal scholars that all advised me that they didn't think he had much of a chance in that case, and said now he's bought another name that someone had, Trumpet of the Patriots. Look, I'm in two minds about this. Firstly, we welcome Clive agrees with, as we said, Trumpet of the Patriots Party is going to be working on a lot of the policies that the Libertarians, One Nation, Jared Rennick's Freedom Party, not exactly, but I'd say 85%, 90%, we've got similar policy platforms. So to have someone like Clive out putting his money, advocating for those policy platforms, I think has a lot to it, because the problem is we get during the election campaign, the minor parties get squeezed out. The media like to run it as it's a Dutton versus Trump campaign. Dutton versus Albanese campaign, as where you've got the two leaders going head to head, and that's how the mainstream media cover it. You get very little time to debate on other policy issues outside of those. Now, so if Clive's there tipping his money in, running ads on these other policy positions and waking Australians up, I think that's a good idea. However, I'm not sure splintering the vote or fragmenting the vote in the Senate is the best idea. Because we saw from the last election, the preferences in the Senate, even if the parties make those recommendations, don't flow anywhere near as tightly as they should. They drift off. And so you end up getting, instead of getting all the vote coming together and helping getting one senator elected for each state that would represent freedom-based parties, you tend to fragment the vote, splinter it, the preferences don't flow, and nobody gets elected.
Moving on to the measles outbreak and vaccines, and RFK said something a bit odd. He's encouraged, or he said that people have a choice. They can take the vaccine, implied that it might be a good idea. What are your thoughts on this latest development?
Well, first, it's always been, I was curious, if you believe, and some people, there's a vaccine fanaticism about that anything that's called a vaccine must be good, right? Which, of course, is a nonsense. Vaccines are like any other product. There's good and bad with every product, and there's good and bad when it comes to vaccines. So that's the first point that I'd make. Secondly, if your vaccine works and you have got a safe and effective vaccine, and your vaccine works, what are you worried about if someone else is not vaccinated? Your vaccine protects you. Why are you worried about
exactly
somebody else will come? And look, it appears also too that all these people that told us there was no randomized, placebo-controlled, long-term studies on hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. Therefore, it's unproven. I'd say it's unproven, right? They're the same people that are promoting all these vaccines that haven't undergone, randomized, double-blind, peer-reviewed, controlled studies over long periods of time. So I think if you listen to Kennedy, he's more saying we have to make these decisions based upon the evidence and not just, fanaticism, which appears as how they've been done in the past. And if the vaccines are shown to be highly effective, let the public know that, let the public see the data, and let the public decide for themselves. I can't see where that's a problem. In fact, that's what we should be encouraging to. And there's a great concern about the unintended consequences and unintended effects of these vaccines, which we've seen with COVID, and yet we really don't have our hands on the data on this, other than that we've seen, data showing that the more COVID shots you have, the more likely you are to have COVID. That's what the peer-reviewed science says. You've got 0 shots, you're down here, then 1 shot is up here, 2 shots is higher again, 3 shots is higher again, 4 shots is higher again. So every shot you had, your risk of you still there, Leon? I've sort of lost part of my screen.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, gotcha, mate. Yeah.
Can you hear me, Craig?
Yes, you bring some up on the screen. Yeah, okay, I can see. Yeah.
I'll bring up some data here. Look, I haven't looked into this myself. It purports to be from the CDC and VAERS. I haven't checked it. I've only seen the chart, to be honest. But it purports to show that far more people, surprise, surprise, have died from the measles vaccine as opposed to measles deaths.
Yeah.
So this is a chart. I think it's spanning the last two decades of 25 years, actually.
Look at that's from CDC and VAERS. That looks like the data's from US mortality, the US deaths. Look, it's again, it's small numbers. But if your child is one of those small numbers, it certainly doesn't matter that it's small numbers. And I think the other interesting chart I've seen, a lot of the measles, the death rates and the infection rates actually declined substantially before the rollout of the vaccines. That's a piece of data that I've been very surprised. I always thought that, it was the vaccinations that stopped that stopped the measles outbreak. But it appears a lot of these graphs that, if you look at them, the actual decline in the infection rate happened before the rollout of the vaccine. So, look, I do think again we need more data on these things, which we should have had after all these decades. And I think Kennedy's the man in there to make these decisions. He's always says, I'll make my decisions based upon the data. And I don't think we could ask for any more.
According to this graph, though, CDC admits, or I don't know if they admit, but according to their data, apparently, the measles vaccine is 16 times more deadlier than the actual disease itself.
Yeah.
So,
questions, and often, how do you classify these deaths from vaccine injuries is also very difficult as well. There's we look at the arguments we've had here. We've had coroners stating that people's deaths from Australia have been because of the vaccine, because of Moderna and Pfizer vaccines. And then that goes to the TGA and they go, no, we disagree. Right? So you got a coroner that actually examined the body, made his decisions on the science and what he's actually saw for himself, and writes a report up and says, I believe in my expert opinion upon examining this person and looking at the details of their death. It was caused by Pfizer and Moderna. And the TGA get it and they go, no, we disagree, and chuck it out. Someone sitting in like an office in Canberra. So again, the classifications of what deaths are caused from these vaccines, again, you're looking at very, figures that can be grossly underestimated.
We've seen some disturbing developments happening recently. Turbo cancers have been on the increase. Young people dying from turbo cancers, so within 3 to 6 months of being diagnosed with a certain form of cancer. We've seen sudden deaths on the increase, all happening with young people under age 60, a lot of people in their 20s and 30s and 40s.
Look, just look at the excess death data. Now this excess death data, looking at the number of Australians dying, went off the charts in December 2021, straight after the rollout of the booster campaign. And the excess mortality rates have remained significantly higher ever since. And, trying to get the media to report any on this is for me, we know why they don't want to report on it, because we know the most likely cause of the extreme rates of excess mortality are the rollout of the vaccines, which the media were the big cheer squad for, So therefore, they're not going to report on the number of excess deaths. But look, the excess deaths we have in Australia should be front page headlines every time the data comes out every month. Now, how you actually measure excess deaths, the way the ABS do it and try and hide the numbers and disclose it, and is really another problem on it. But I think on the most generous assumptions, since the rollout of the booster vaccines, there's over 100,000 Australians more dead than we would have expected. Anyone wants to challenge me on my maths on that and how I did it, it's a long, complicated thing. But I think those numbers are if anything, an underestimate. We've had 100,000 more Australians die than would have been expected since the rollout of the booster vaccines. Now, the question is, what's been the cause of that? You can come up with a whole lot of likely suspects. If you're the police looking at investigating this, like who are the suspects for these extra 100,000 deaths? Well, the number one person you'd have on your list would be the COVID vaccines, and in fact, you'd have them arrested, you have them in custody while you're investigating, because of the high likelihood that was the cause.
Sarah, I could be corrected on this, but Sandra, you're asking, has there been an inquiry? I believe there was a Senate inquiry. It was introduced by Ralph Babette.
Yeah, there was a Senate inquiry, again, controlled by the government, complete whitewashing deaths. We need royal commissions, plural. Right? We need proper royal commissions into what happened during COVID, into excess deaths, where we can have it publicly debated, where experts can put their evidence in, where they can be cross-examined by both sides, where you can have an advocate, for the vaccines, an advocate against the vaccines, cross-examining, people to put their evidence in, because this is, as I said, it's almost equivalent of a jumbo jet falling out of the sky every couple of weeks. If that was happening, then you'd imagine it'd be front page news. There'd be, the government must do something. There must be an inquiry. What's going to happen? We're having that same rate of deaths. It doesn't even make the papers. And
we've got Chris, some disturbing information here, documented evidence of effects of measles vax. So one doctor claimed that there was 20 cases of epileptic fits in girls when researching. This is related to, I'm sorry to hear about your daughter, Chris, by the way.
Yeah.
So obviously there's a lot of people, that watch this that either have been vaccine injured or have someone in their immediate family who've been vaccine injured. So it's very unfortunate. Moving on.
I saw a question up there said, could Clive buy a media channel? Well, interesting. We were going to do that at the last election. There was the shopping channel on Channel 7, which had gone into administration. And Clive had planned to buy the shopping channel and turn it into that's one of those like Channel 7, like was it Gem or something, other ones, secondary channels they had that's free to air. Clive was going to buy that and turn it into a free to air news network. Right? Everything was organised, done. I think part of the deal was like, there was as taking the business over to get the access to the TV rights. I think there was like a container of pots and pans, and Clive was trying to work out what he was going to do with a shipping container of pots and pans. Right? But what happened when it came to the deal, Channel 7 had to agree to change the usage permit of the license. So the usage permit was a shopping channel. We just had to get the agreement changed to a 24-hour news channel, but Channel 7 wouldn't agree. So unfortunately, the deal fell through.
There are calls here. Someone's calling for a freedom coalition. I agree with you. We very much need one. You mentioned before, Craig, that all these minor parties are cannibalizing the votes.
This was put together by John Ruddick, the leader he came up with this idea of the leader of the Libertarian Party in New South Wales. He's the upper house member in New South Wales. And the idea he came up with was that, firstly, the weakness we have in our voting system is that Senate system where it is non-preferential and the preferences don't flow and people don't understand the preferential system. So dividing the freedom vote simply divides it. It doesn't preference back. We get no one elected. We get one or two people elected, right? So his idea was that we run in the lower house, all the minor parties retain their individual identity, right? and they run in as many lower house seats as each party possibly can. And they challenge each other in the lower house seats because competition is good. So it can be the Libertarians can go up against, One Nation in a seat, or Clive Trumpets of the Patriots could go up against Jared Rennick in a seat. Let's have the parties challenging each other in that lower house because the preferences do tend to flow. But in the upper house, we come together as a joint ticket, and we all run under the one joint ticket. Right? Now you see that's how the Liberals and the Nationals work together. So it's the same in Victoria and New South Wales. If you go in to vote in the Senate ballot paper, you'll notice we'll have Liberals and underneath it Nationals with one box above the line. So if you're a National supporter, you don't vote separately for the Nationals, you vote for the joint Liberal National ticket. So we're saying we do something separate with the Freedom Coalition. We can have three parties listed under the line and a box above it where they all vote in that one ticket. Now, that combines the vote. Now, the problem is, how do you go about selecting the candidates for that joint ticket? Now, this is where John Ruddick's plan was genius. He said, well, what we have, every member of a minor Freedom Coalition party gets one vote in a grand primary. So if you're a member of One Nation, you get one vote. If you're a member of the United Australia Party, you get one vote. If you're a member of the Libertarians, you get one vote. Because his belief was that those people are not so much wedded to their particular party, right? They're more interested to find the very best candidate that they can put in the Senate. So you have a particular day. It can be at Melbourne Town Hall, and you'd have proxy votes for people that are with a distance difficulty to get to Melbourne, or in Sydney Town Hall, right? You have a similar to they have a Republican or Democrat primary vote, as where the candidates from each party stand up there and they give a 15-minute speech, and then they take questions from the floor. They engage in a bit of a debate backwards and forwards with questions from the moderator. And then at the end of the process, every member of the party gets to decide who will be the best Senate candidate to represent them. And that puts the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth candidate on the Senate ballot paper. Now, that is it's a grassroots up system. It allows the member of the parties to have their say. It becomes an encouragement for those individual parties then to get out and campaign. And the other beauty of this system is that you need 4% to get electoral funding. So if you get 3.99%, you get zero. So at the next election campaign, not the one coming up, the one after, for every vote that you get in the Senate, you get $5 worth of electoral funding. And let's just say in New South Wales, there's, I think it's about 5 million voters, 5 million voters. Okay. So you've got 10, if you get 4%, what that's, we'll get 20,000 voters. Is that right? 20,000 voters is right. So it's 20,000 by 5, which means you get $100,000 of federal government electoral funding. Now, at the moment, if you get 3.9%, you get nothing. If you get 4%, you get $100,000. So at the moment, you've got all these minor parties falling just under that 4% threshold, not getting a Senate electoral funding, all that electoral funding going to the government, as well if they were to combine and get 10% electoral funding in New South Wales. That'd be 500,000 votes by 5. That'd be $2.5 million that they'd have, which would give them the ability to fight a little bit more on a level playing field. And the way you would divide that money up amongst the parties is subject to their proportionate vote in the lower house. So it encourages those minor parties to get out and campaign hard in the lower house to help get the votes in the upper house. That's the way it could work. It just requires, the grand poobahs of the minor parties to give up some of their power and hand it back to the people that are the members of their party.
And I'll just ask this question from Chris. So I'll get to Martin Taylor's question in a moment, but the issue is in relation to the various parties that they have completely opposing views on some issues. What then? So how do you get together all these parties that can't agree on key issues?
Well, I think if you looked across the minor parties, there's not a great deal of difference between them. you think what the now let's take the some of the recent legislation, the hate speech bill, right now. Alex Antic from the Liberal Party crossed the floor to vote against that. So the Liberals and Labor were for it. Alex Antic voted against it. Right? Ralph Babbitt from the UAP voted against it. Jared Rennick voted against it. But unfortunately on that, we had the One Nation guys, Malcolm and Pauline, decided to abstain. Now, I think if there was more time on that, again, this was rushed through the parliament, I think they made a terrible mistake by abstaining. I think they probably realise now they made a mistake from abstaining. So there will be times, there will be minor differences in the parties. But that's also why having this grand coalition and giving every member of each party a vote, because I'm sure there's a lot of people in the One Nation party that are very upset with One Nation about what they did, right, when it came to that vote. So it's not the idea that people, again, it's the voters that get the say on this about who's the candidate they'll elect, and they'll pick the candidate that best aligns with their views.
I think you may have already partly answered Martin's question there because you mentioned the hate speech laws. But Craig, what are your thoughts on radical censorship bills and digital IDs?
This is an appalling piece of legislation. I'm talking about the hate speech legislation, right? What this now does, I could say things on this program, right? If I fall foul of the law, I could get a knock on the door by the police at 7 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock in the morning, and handcuffed, carted off to the police station, and given face a jail sentence for what I posted to Facebook or said online, up to 5 years.
We see that in the UK. We're seeing that now.
Now, firstly, in the USA, such legislation would not see the light of day because it would be unconstitutional under their First Amendment of the US Constitution. That's why one of our policies of the Libertarian Party is we want to bring in an amendment to the Australian Constitution, so a change to our Constitution, which would be done via referendum at the subsequent election. We wouldn't want to run, like Albanese wasted $500 million on running the voice referendum instead of running it at the same time as the federal election. He wanted to run it midterm, so the AEC's got to roll out all the polling booths, got to get everyone to turn up to the polling booths and things, and pay all the polling booth workers and set everything up. $500 million of cost there. You run it at the same time as the federal election. That's the first thing. And you give Australians the choice: should we have the same rights as American citizens, and should we have in our Constitution a provision equivalent to the US First Amendment? And I believe most Australians will say yes. At the moment, what are we second-class citizens when it comes to global debates? And anyone that's debating online is debating from people all around the world. So now, today, as Australians, we're second-class citizens. There's some things that we can't say when we're contributing to debates because it will then put us in jail, that Americans are free to say. So we're these ridiculous second-class citizens. Another thing important on this, what they did in this bill, previously, and remember this was an amendment to existing legislation, previously to be in breach of hate speech or to incite violence, right? You had to intentionally know what you were doing. You had to go out and sort of, and do it with intent to cause harm and damage, right? The change they've made, they don't have to show you intended to do it. So you could be speaking honestly, you could be speaking in good faith, you could be speaking with no harm, no intention of causing any harm, but they're no longer defences under this act. All you have to do is find one person in so-called these protected groups, right? And the protected groups have been extended to include not just people of race or religion, they're people of intersex status, sexual preference, and even political opinion. So people of those groups thinks that you've said something that has led them to have apprehension that they may have some type of force or violence used against them. And again, they've extended. It's not just physical violence. It's any type of force. Remember, force can be moral force. It can be, they've extended the definition of it. So it's no longer just physical violence, that's force or violence with no definition about what force means. If they fear that that's going to happen, bang, you're guilty. 5 years in jail.
Hey, Susan, be careful what you wish for. Where's that comment? She said that she hasn't had a knock on the door from the police yet. So be careful for what you wish for.
What is one of Churchill's famous quotes? Churchill said something like, my wording, someone might correct my exact wording, something like, the true sign of a democracy is when you hear a knock on the door at 5 o'clock in the morning and you know it's the milkman. Now, in our country today, if you hear a knock on the door at 5 o'clock in the morning, there's a good chance it could be the police coming to arrest you. This is something you've posted on social media. And that is not how a democracy should function.
It's like Stalinist Russia, which is a nice segue to Donald Trump. One of the things that stood out for me, I want to get to Zelensky in a moment, but where Starmer, they had an interesting exchange prior to their exchange with Zelensky in the Oval Office with Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, and Vice President J.D. Vance mentioned that they don't have freedom of speech in the UK.
Right.
And Prime Minister two-tier Keir Starmer got a bit defensive. One has to wonder why he got a bit defensive.
Just quick, someone asked the questions there. I think does this apply to SM comments or social media comments? Absolutely. And I could just get before I come to that point. A real important point. This hate speech legislation wasn't just standalone, right? This is done by people that know exactly what they are doing. So firstly, they set up the digital ID legislation, right? Yes, no, digital ID won't be compulsory. Yes. No worries. Nothing to worry about. Here, right? Then they brought in the age verification bill, right? So if you now have to show to kick under 16 media off social media, the only way they can do that is get you to prove that you're over 16. So right now, and this will only come to light after the election campaign, right? Because of those laws that were passed late last year, the e-safety commissioner, the e-safety Karen down there, she is now working on laws about what Australians will have to do to prove that you are over 16 years of age every time you want to go and log on to your social media account. Right? Because that's the only way you can ban people under 16 is if you can have some formative proof, and that will involve some type of digital ID. So what they will do, as we get after this election campaign, not only we have this hate speech legislation in place where they can come and arrest you, but if you're going to post a comment, you'll have to log on with your digital ID, so they will know who you are and where you live when you post a comment. So those three bills, the digital ID bill, the age verification bill, and the hate speech bill, will all work together to try and ensure that our government bureaucracy and these left-wing political authorities and our police that we have can now know where you live when you post to social media and can be monitoring what you say. And if you say something that has upset someone that they've become apprehensive about, and apprehension is the word used in the Act, they can come around and knock on your door and give you 5 years on jail. And even if they, you watch these cases will only come about after the election campaign, and it'll be the threat and the fear that'll discourage people from posting and commenting what they want on social media in Australia.
The way Albanese packaged this and tried to present to the Australian people, I mean, it's just laughable. It's either you want to laugh or cry. It was all about the children, protecting the children. Benevolent elbow. He's so concerned about children.
The children can still log on and watch, all sorts of horrific things online, but they just can't access social media. And think of some kids that are 15 years of age that live in remote areas of Australia that don't have much social contact with friends because of the extreme distances they live in, that rely upon their friends, and kids with disabilities that often form groups and have friendships online. All social media is not evil. It should be a parental responsibility about letting kids on social media. And many 14 and 15-year-old kids get an enormous benefit from the friendship and the camaraderie that they get from being able to contact people through social media. And now this is all about the children. It was simply a Trojan horse to enable the E-Safety Commissioner to make sure she gets to know who we are and where we live so they can come after us for our social media posts.
I think we're about 5 years behind the UK. I don't know if they have hate speech laws in the UK. It sounds like they do, because every second video you see on social media is the police in the UK showing up to someone's door and saying, you have written a Facebook post. And it sounds like something out of like a satirical, comedy company skit, like Full Frontal skit. You've written a post, you've offended someone. Now you're under arrest. Please come to the station for questioning. And then JD Vance pulled up two-tier Keir Starmer in the Oval Office for that. So it's just a nice little segue into Donald Trump, the Trump administration. How would you give us a report card on his first 30 days? Well, it's been 30 days plus in office.
First, I think the great strength of his administration so far has been that the people Trump has around him, right? I think any good leader needs to have a lot of good people around him. I think that's the first step that does. Now, I think during his first term, he would have come in there and sort of think, well, how does this all work? And he would have said, well, yeah. And there'd be people advising him from everywhere, and he wouldn't know whether those people advising him were actually on his side or trying to undermine him or white-hand him. No. He's had 4 years. Then the COVID thing hit, and he's had 4 years to think about it. So the best thing I think about Trump is the team that he's got around him, like people like Elon Musk and Kennedy, and people he's picked Bongiorno to do roles, and the list goes on and on and on and on of people that he's had in his administration that he's signed up to give roles to, and he can just let them go and do that. They'll do a great job. What he's untracked in the waste and mismanagement, the inefficiency and theft of government, I think is absolutely astonishing, and that will be exactly the same situation here. You'll have these bureaucracies completely out of control, running. So he's done a great job there at uncovering that. Of course, the real thing he does, the duties is something that, the tariffs are something that always concern me a little bit, but he appears to be, tariffs in the US are a little bit different situation because their economy is so dominant, right? As Australians, we want access to the US market because the market's so big, right? And to sell stuff into them. Right? So they can really trade. So I think Trump really doesn't want to put tariffs on, but he's very keen to use them as a bargaining tool. And he's used it very successfully so far, as we've seen already, as a bargaining tool to get countries to give the US the best deal and to bring them to what is a better deal than what they were getting before. When it comes to Zelensky and Ukraine, I disagree with what Peter Dutton and Albanese's position here is. I think it is time for peace. Right? I think Trump was 100% correct when he said Zelensky is gambling with nuclear war. Now, it's a flippant phrase, you said nuclear war, right? The horrors of a nuclear war are beyond our imagination to even comprehend. And to think that we're gambling with this, when you've got live firings of missiles with a nation that has nuclear armaments, has got thousands of nuclear weapons pointed everywhere. This is in these circumstances, diplomacy has to be the number one issue. These people, they go around like beating their chests and I'm tough. Oh, let's go and take Putin on, sort of thing, right? It's not the 1930s. We are living in a world that is nuclear armed, and diplomacy is important. That is why we didn't keep fighting the Korean War. The Korean War was negotiated peace settlement because it was thought, rather than have a nuclear war on the Korean Peninsula, let's have a peace settlement and let's go for a long-term peace to bring North Korea into the peace. Now that's taken, what are we now, sort of 60, 70 years onwards from the Korean War, and we still haven't got that peace, but that would have been far better than having a nuclear war on the Korean Peninsula. The same with Vietnam. These people that say, oh, we should keep fighting on in Ukraine, do they say we should have kept on fighting in Vietnam? Should we kept on sending the hundreds of thousands of Australian young men to fight in the jungles of Vietnam? At sometimes where you're in a nuclear armed situation, you've got to be pragmatic and you've got to be diplomatic, and sometimes you've got to try and seek peaceful resolutions to these conflicts. And I believe Trump is also right that enough young Ukrainian men have died. They're talking about something like 1 million Ukrainian men. What that does, remember, that's also 1 million women that will never marry, never have partners, never have children. Because of this, we want to see peace in those regions. We want to see them stabilized. And remember, this is also areas of Crimea and the Donbass where these are being fought over. These are areas, and sometimes we sort of, as Australians, we know our borders etched in our memories as the island continent, right? These places in Europe, they've been fighting and they've been going backwards and forwards between one band of bandits or villains and another band of bandits and villains and warlords for thousands of years.
That's right.
Like Crimea was eventually controlled by the ancient Greeks. Right? So regimes of, so the idea that we should risk, and this is the current boundaries resulted from the dissolution of the Soviet Union. There was always arguments about exactly where the borders should be, and should this village in the Donbass be in Russia or Soviet Union sort of thing. And it goes back thousands of years worth of history and hatred amongst each other. The idea that we should risk a nuclear war over where the boundaries should be between Ukraine and Russia in the Donbass is insanity. Pure insanity. And yet we've got all these politicians out there saying, I stand for more war. They wouldn't be able to find the Donbass on a map.
Kiev was actually the capital of Russia, the old Russian Empire, not the USSR, but you're close. Most people aren't aware of that. That's a good point, Sandra.
Yeah. Look, I think the average Ukrainian citizen and the average Russian citizen have so much in common. Right? And they just want to get on and live their lives in peace. Right? Get on and raise their families and live their life in peace and have some prosperity and some enjoyment. They don't want to be fighting each other over, the regions in the Donbass and Crimea. We've got to try and end this. We're going to try and stop the fighting, because the chances of where you've got live fighting, the chances of not like a planned nuclear attack, but a miscalculation is incredibly risky. And I don't think that we can actually take those risks.
Half of the Ukraine, the eastern Ukraine, is Russian speaking. There's a lot of Russian citizens, and Zelensky, by the way, actually grew up speaking Russian. So that's his first language. Yeah. So
there should be some settlement about where the borders is. There should be easy passage between people between one side of the Russian border and the Ukrainian border in those areas. Now, it is in the world's best interest. Look, people say, "Oh, you're a Putin lover." Putin is not Australia's friend. Right? Putin is a pretty ruthless dictator, right, that will do the best things for Russia. Right? But the reality is, he controls Russia's nuclear weapons. Right? There's currently a war between those two nations. And I think we should be doing everything we can to try and get some peace settlement, rather than talk about, we'll send more Australian weaponry and send more money and even potentially troops over to the Ukraine.
I was going to ask you about that. Albanese is to the rescue. So wearing his cape, flying off to Ukraine. What do you think? He's committing Australian peacekeepers to the Ukraine.
At the gay Mardi Gras the other week, we should have had a sign like, Albanese, I want you. I want you to fight for the Ukraine. That should have been the message.
With rainbow signs.
Yeah, you should have taken around a clipboard and pen and got people to sign up to go and fight. Fight in the Donbass at the gay Mardi Gras. I wonder how that would have gone down, sort of things.
Any news? I mean, there was quite a tragic thing. He was obviously naive, this person. An Australian soldier was caught prisoner of war. I heard there were mixed reports about him being executed, and then there was a report that he was alive. Do you know anything about that?
I don't. Look, the thing is, if you go, I think he was actually on Russian territory.
That's right. He was caught
remember,
fighting in Russian territory.
Whenever you're in a dispute on anything, whether it's a personal dispute or a business argument or a political thing, you've got to try and understand the other side's mindset and what they are thinking. Right? Now, remember, the Russian mindset is that they lost 27 million people in World War II. Right? Look how important Anzac Day is here to Australia. Right? We lost about 40,000 people in World War II. Russia lost 27 million. Right? When they see that they were attacked from Western Europe, they see they were attacked from Western Europe in World War I. They see they were attacked from Western Europe from Napoleon, but in the late 1800s. Right? So they've got this mentality that there's a threat that comes. Now, whether that's right or wrong, that's their mentality. And you've got to try and understand that mentality and then you're going to go and dress up in army fatigues, get a rifle, and go and fight on Russian soil. And seriously, it's as much as we may dislike Russia and Putin in many aspects, we've got to be pragmatic about what the situation is. Right? And the best thing for the world is to try and support President Trump and get a peace settlement and stop the live firing of weapons between those two nations.
Good point there. Can we focus on Australia? Unfortunately, look, although it's far away from Australia, it is affecting us because we've got our idiot politicians who are sending millions, if not billions of dollars, and Albo wants to send peacekeepers all at our expense while we have a cost of living crisis. So unfortunately, it's not something that we can ignore.
We've got Australians without housing, we've got Australians living under houses and bridge, living in their cars and living under bridges and living in tents, and yet we're sending billions off to the Ukraine. And says the sooner this war ends, the better it is for the world.
Just a question here, going back to Australia from Martin Taylor. What would be your political response to vaccine?
Look, 100%. There should be compensation, firstly, as we have seen, which is Trump has done in the USA for the military. Anyone that was mandated out of their jobs and lost their job because of a vaccine mandate should be reinstated in full with all their full entitlements and should be paid compensation for the period that they were unable to work. There was no justification. There was no scientific justification whatsoever for those mandates. They were a breach of international human rights laws. They were a breach of our own human rights commitments in this country. And they were simply 100% wrong. So there needs to be accountability. So firstly, every person should be, that was mandated out. Now, everyone that was vaccine injured. And again, sometimes this is difficult to prove if someone was vaccine injured, but I would say if there's doubt, the doubt favors the person that was injured because it is most likely that the vaccine caused their injury. And we have people who have suffered catastrophic, life-changing injuries because they injected a substance that the politicians in this country told them was safe and effective when the data was crystal clear that it was neither safe nor effective nor was it necessary. So absolutely, that is one of our policies. A full reinstatement of everyone. Firstly, we've still got, I saw in Senate estimates there the other day, apparently we've still got vaccine mandate requirements for our Defence Force personnel.
Unbelievable.
We try to weaken our Defence Force on purpose. And so, if we follow we give best evidence for a target, these, and we've not only got to stop these, but we've got to legislate, and I tried to do this when I was in Parliament. There's a provision under the, it's the, what's it called again, the International Human Rights Convention International Treaty on Human Rights and Bioethics. And there's a provision in that. This is an international treaty that we've signed, and not from a great one for international treaties. But it says that you cannot subject someone to discrimination or prejudice if they fail to undergo a medical intervention. So you can't force people to undergo medical interventions with threats of prejudice or discrimination. That's a treaty that we signed up to. That should be part of Australian law. So no Australian under any circumstance should be forced to undergo any form of medical intervention to keep their job. So we're not only fixing this COVID situation up, we're making sure that never again will an Australian have to think for themselves, well, do I inject this stuff into my body or do I go without a job and can't feed my family? Because that's the situation Australians were put in by the Liberal and the Labor parties of Australia.
Great question from Catherine here. So, Craig, would you pursue the pharma companies for compensation?
Yes. Now, I've argued we should be able to do this under the current act we've got. Misleading or deceptive conduct in trade or commerce. It's the old Section 52 of the Trade Practices Act. They've changed the number. It's under the Australian Consumer Law now. But it basically says if you're engaging in trade or commerce, that you can't make comments that are misleading or deceptive. Now, you don't need to show the deceptive part needs to show intent. You've just got to show it's misleading. If you've done that, you're liable to pay people compensation. So I think the comments of Pfizer and the comments of the Pfizer executives about how they claimed these vaccines were better than sliced bread and how wonderful they were, right? They were made in trade or commerce because they were about a commercial product that was being sold, and they were misleading. Therefore, that should open Pfizer up and Moderna up to massive claims of compensation from anyone that was injured by their products or anyone that suffered any harm or loss. And this should be run as a class action by the ACCC, or hopefully there'll be some legal group or somewhere will run this class action, because Pfizer have engaged and Moderna have engaged in misleading or deceptive conduct in trade or commerce, and that opens the door that they have to pay compensation for everyone who was harmed by their act.
Interesting question from Andrew. So, Andrew, I believe I could be corrected on this. I'm not sure about Australia, but in New Zealand, their bureaucracy was exempt from vaccine mandates. And over in America, the CDC, the staff working for the CDC were all exempt from vaccine mandates, which is interesting.
Yeah, well, yeah, politicians, I think in Victoria, there is a requirement that you have to have an injection to go into Parliament. In federal Parliament, there was no mandates upon any federal politician. So every federal politician got their wage, got their salary, got their office, got all their staff, right? Continue with no mention of a mandate and no forced injections. In fact, I know that there's several politicians that have been injured by the vaccines that won't say anything about it. And then I know there's other politicians from both sides of Parliament. We talked about this in late 2020 when I was still a member of the Liberal Party, when they said no way on God's breath would they be injecting the vaccines, and their doctors were telling them not to. But yet when it came to their public position later on, they all went silent. So I know there's many members of that federal Parliament that did not inject that substance into their body. And I know I was one of them, but I put my hand up and said I wasn't going to do it. I gave the reasons why. And many others were encouraging their constituents to do it, but not getting it done themselves. And I think they're the worst of them all.
Wow, that's just sick. And my understanding is, I think all federal institutions, including Australia Post, they didn't have any mandates for any federal bodies.
Yeah, no, I know we know the Australian ADF forces did. The Defence Forces did. I'm not sure about Australia Post. But it simply should have been Scott Morrison had the ability. He didn't have the power to mandate vaccines, but he had the power to make mandates illegal. I got advice from the draftsman, the constitutional draftsman at the Parliament, and we drew two pieces of legislation up that would have banned vaccine mandates across the nation. The constitutional experts that looked at it, constitutional lawyers in Parliament looked at it and said, yes, you can do that. Right? Morrison and Albanese instructed all the Labor and Liberal members to vote against that. I think I had a couple. I know George Christensen voted for it. I think Lou O'Brien voted on one of them for it. But the rest of them, every member of the Parliament, apart from those few people, the lower house voted against those laws.
Now, I think we've got another podcast streaming now, but just to wrap up, Craig, anything else that you'd like to share? Any words of wisdom to close off our conversation tonight?
We've got a couple of important things. The other issue we've got to tackle, I think, three important things in this election that differentiate the minor freedom parties from the major parties. The first is freedom of speech. We are going to this election with a policy that we should have the same rights as American citizens, and we should have in our Constitution a protection against freedom of speech, exactly as they do as the US First Amendment, right? The second one is on net zero. We've got to stop this net zero nonsense. It's destroying the economic viability of our country. It is really causing us significant financial harm. It's making us poorer. It's making China richer. It is pointless, futile, and extremely costly. And the third one is on the migration, levels of migration. We have had the Albanese government, when they came to office, forecasts for the first 2 years of their office in their budget papers, 235,000 people. So that was 470,000 for the first 2 years. They imported over 1 million people in the first 2 years, more than double what they forecast. And of course, that has been an unprecedented number, unprecedented in our nation's history. And we wonder why all of a sudden our infrastructure hasn't caught up, our housing hasn't caught up, our hospitals haven't caught up, our ambulance services haven't caught up, our schooling hasn't caught up. So we are hopelessly behind on the infrastructure that we need in this country because of that surge of migration. We need to greatly cut those migration numbers to give our chance for our infrastructure to catch up. Right? And then we need to reset how we actually bring migrants into this country to make sure the benefit is firstly to the people of Australia. Because at the moment we are bringing in these large numbers of people, the benefit is the Australian people are not benefiting from. They're actually causing declines in productivity. They're causing declines in real GDP. And so we've got a complete reset, but we need to press that pause button for a while. Otherwise, I says, that's, the only way we've got to try and get housing affordability back. So, one of the most important things we can do is to give Australian kids back the dream that they can own their own piece of Australia. Because this migration policy, this concentration of everyone has to live in Sydney and Melbourne and Brisbane, in the capital cities, in high-rise dog boxes, we've got to scrap that. We've got to strengthen our regional areas to give young Aussies the chance that, okay, I can go and own my own home and land if I live in a regional area by moving some of the jobs out of the city into those areas. Restoring the Australian dream so young kids can again believe that they can own part of Australia, I think is one of the most important things that we can do.
And Craig, everyone who's watching, about to go into Michael's live, please make sure to follow Craig on X, on Facebook. Have I missed any other platforms?
Telegram as well.
Telegram.
Facebook. On Facebook, I have a life ban from Facebook, right? But telling that everything I posted was exactly the truth. They didn't like it. So even President Trump, they allowed back on Facebook. I still have a life ban for only saying what was exactly true during COVID. So X and Telegram are the places you find me. And please share, like, comment on any post that I make, because it helps with the algorithms to help more and more people see it.
The fact that you're still banned from Facebook is an indication that people should vote for Craig Kelly. Put him number 1 in the Senate for New South Wales.
Thanks, Leon.
Thank you, Craig. Would love to have you back on. Thank you so much for your time, and God bless everyone. Have a good evening.
Okay. Thanks. Bye.